Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG video. This time, not actually a tabletop video. Going to be doing another one of these top 10 decks videos. This time, just for the Destined Rivals format. We've got another month of League Cups ahead of us before the new Black-White set comes out and the meta shifts. Well, really just a little bit, couple of cards coming out that are significant. I'll be referencing those cards throughout this video as well, talking about how I anticipate this rankings to shift when the new cards come out. But with that in mind, let's just get right into the tier list. Now, for this tier list, I'm going to be counting top down. I think that just makes the most sense, as the decks on this list are really relative to each other, especially the top few decks, right? Once we get beyond the maybe top 3 decks, the rest of the decks, their merit really depends on how well they stack up into the top 3 decks. So let's get into it here. Number 1 is Gardevoir. Now, this deck has been dominating the competitive circuit all year. I don't know how many regional wins it has, but I feel like just about every event Gardevoir ends up winning, regardless of how good the deck seems in that specific format. It just always finds a way to win. Strengths for the deck, Dragapult. It has a pretty strong matchup into just about every Dragapult deck, specifically Straight Pult, which was a deck I was a big fan of for a while. Pretty much completely non-viable at this point, I think, because Gardevoir is so strong, and it does just destroy Straight Pult. PultZard, also, I think, unfavored into Gardevoir. PultDusk, probably the best variant into Gardevoir, in my opinion. I'm not even sure if it's favored into Gardevoir, but it definitely has the best fighting chance. Additionally, it's really strong into Raging Bolt, which I don't actually think is like an amazing deck, but a lot of people continue to play Raging Bolt. It's beginner friendly. It is fast. It wins a lot of games simply because your opponent can't set up, which is actually one of the main weaknesses of this Gardevoir deck is consistency, I find, right? Without anything like Recon Directive, Zoroark's Trade, Noctowl, none of that going on, just Fez and Mew. Sometimes the draw power of this deck is a little lacking, especially in those opening hands, and a deck like Raging Bolt or Joltik Box can really just run you off the board, or really any deck can run you off the board. And I also find that the Grimmsnarl matchup for this Gardevoir deck is not amazing, especially if the Grimmsnarl player is very tactical, maybe gets a rescue board onto the Grimmsnarl so that they can retreat through the Munkidori confusion. Additionally, something to mention here is that when Air Balloon comes out in the new Black-White set, that'll be a big boost for Grimmsnarl and potentially a big hit for Gardevoir. As far as the list goes, I'm just playing Isaiah Bradner's NAIC winning list. They proved that the deck is incredibly strong. They put a lot of time into it, and as I've been playing the deck, it makes a lot of sense. Instead of relying on the tricks of the past, Countercatcher, Screamtail the bench, or Countercatcher attack with Gardevoir EX, they're really just setting up a ton of Munkidoris in order to gain extra prize cards. Even if you fall behind 2 or 3 prizes, you can make those prizes back by generating some monkey damage, getting some free KOs onto, Dracloaks, Impidimps, Frostlasses, and whatever other decks are in the format. Hoots, that's another big one that I find myself picking up free KOs with. Otherwise, the list is pretty standard. Just 1 Bravery Charm and no Drifloon, which I have been missing quite a lot, actually, as I play this deck. There definitely could be some merit to playing something closer to Riley McKay's list from NAIC, right? The second place list. Also, a big inclusion in that list is the Shaman, which I think is a big deal in the mirror match, being able to block Screamtail. You can set up some really nice endgames in the Gardevoir mirror with the Shaman if you have like 2 Gardevoirs and then you have the Shaman on the bench to protect your Munkidoris. Maybe your opponent's on 1 prize, and then you just start retreating between your Gardevoir EXs, and you can make some pretty massive comebacks, especially when they're not playing the Drifloon. So definitely an interesting variant we have here. I also think one of the biggest strengths of Gardevoir is that when your opponent, flips over a Ralts or Monkey, Screamtail, whatever, you don't necessarily know what's actually in their deck, right? And so you're afraid of Countercatcher the whole game, and yet this list only has 1 Countercatcher, right? You're afraid of Drifloon, and yet this list doesn't even play it, right? Maybe you're afraid of the 3rd Monkey, the 4th Monkey coming down, but they're actually playing the Drifloon variant. And Shaman is also another one of those cards where, if you know Gardevoir is not going to play Shaman, something like Zoroark EX or Terrabox becomes incredible, but you don't know what they're going to have. And so I think that's what makes this deck so strong, and will make it a force even through the next couple of formats. It'll just continue to adapt between, heavy monkey builds, Drifloon builds, maybe Jellicent builds now coming out in the next set. But we'll leave it at that. This deck is very strong. Oh, one other thing I will mention, the energy switch is very strong, but I find it very unreliable. Like I already mentioned, there's not a lot of draw power in the deck. So I find myself really never having energy switch on the turns I want it. So I might end up cutting the energy switch from this list for maybe the Shaman, maybe a second counter catcher, maybe some other consistency card, like another Nest Ball could be good as well. Yeah. Coming in at number 2 here, we have my PultZard deck that I've been playing. Well, it's not really my deck, but the deck I've been playing from NAIC. A lot of strengths of this deck. The biggest strength is the consistency I find with the Dre Cloaks, Arven for Unfair Stamp. It is quite rare that I open up with a dead hand with this deck. The TM Evo, also a really nice touch. When I moved over from straight Pult to PultZard, I was worried the deck would be less consistent, but I actually find it to be more consistent with the Technical Machine evolution. Also, the Charizard kind of saves you on your energy attachments, right? So, one of the biggest ways your deck is kind of inconsistent is the energy attachments, right? So on turn 1, you don't get your luminous energy on your Pult, and then on turn 2, you can't attack. So then, I don't know, you got a Badoo, and then maybe you whiff another attachment, right? Whereas with the Charizard, you have that ability to just make a Dragapult in one turn, or make the Charizard get attacking, get prize trading, and maybe get to your optimal attacks later on in the game. I find the deck to be very strong into Raging Bolt, especially compared to the other Pult decks. The Charizard allows you to get extra energy acceleration, right? So one of the biggest problems with the other Pult decks is you get your Drake Cloak down with an energy, and then they snipe it off with the Raging Bolt, and then you attach an energy to your Drake Cloak, and they snipe it with the Raging Bolt, and quite often you end up down multiple prizes before you get an attack off. Whereas with this version of the deck, you can get down a Charizard, accelerate energies, potentially just attack with the Charizard, or, maybe attack with the Pult as well, and you can actually prize race them very effectively. Similar story with the Joltik Box matchup. They amp your Drake Cloak with the energy and you pass, and that's one of the biggest ways you lose. But with the Charizard, you get that energy acceleration. You're just way stronger against these aggressive decks. I also think Grimmsnarl is, I think the Charizard Pult deck is the best Pult deck into Grimmsnarl. I think the Charizard gives you a lot of control in the end game, right? You make Grimmsnarl very afraid to go down to 2 prizes. They go down to 2, Monkey Dory plus Charizard kills Grimmsnarl. That attack also doesn't leave any damage on their board, which is a really big deal. Combo that with an Iono, and you're very likely to make some really strong endgame comebacks. As far as the weaknesses go, I mentioned already, I don't think this deck beats Gardevoir. It does have a fairly decent fighting chance, I would say. Maybe 40% of the time, 30% of the time you're beating Gardevoir, you are able to knock out a Gardevoir EX. So if they have a little bit of a stumbling draw, they're not able to get out a lot of the Monkey Dories, it is still completely winnable. And then PultDusk is the other major weakness of this deck. Really, the Charizard and Pult Mirror just doesn't do a whole lot, and so you've kind of got a decently sized package of cards that do nothing, while they've got a decently sized package of cards that lets them board wipe you potentially. So that's definitely going to be a bad matchup. As far as the list goes, I did just do a video on this deck with my tournament run at Kansan last Friday, but here's the list. Some changes I mentioned in that video as well. You could take out the Badoo. Now, the Badoo is very important versus PultDusk. If you don't play it, you're going to get board wiped very early, right? Pop a Dusclops onto one of your Drake Cloaks, countercatcher the other one, Phantom Dive, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But other than that, if for whatever reason you're not concerned about that, then you could probably cut the Badoo, maybe just play a second TM Evolution, right? If you do cut the Badoo, I would cut it for the TM Evolution because, on turn 1, you kind of have 2 options, right? Your Arven can either get you Poff and Evo, which gets you double cloak, or it can get you Poff and board, which gets you into the Badoo. But if you don't play the Badoo, your only turn 1 option is Evo, and so if you prize it, that's really bad, and so I'll be playing 2 of those. Additionally, you could cut the Jamming Tower. I do like the Stadium bump, but it could be an Artisan, a Watchtower, it could be a Town Store, really anything, but I do like it being a Stadium. You could take it out for something else, but I wouldn't recommend it. Coming in at number 3 here, we have Grimmsnarl. Now, I already mentioned this when we talked about Gardevoir, and you're already seeing how this tier list is very relative to Gardevoir, and now also these kind of second, third place decks. But I think this is probably the best deck into Gardevoir, maybe other than like PultDusk or some of the Turbo decks, which we'll kind of talk about later. But pretty strong into Gardevoir, especially if you are able to get the rescue board onto the Grimmsnarl, protect from the Mind Bend, get 2 Grimmsnarls up. I've even debated putting 2 rescue boards into my Grimmsnarl deck and like more energy cards, just so that Mind Bend isn't such a hindrance. I'm not sure if there's like a card that just says you can't be confused. I would play it. If there was a tool card that said you can't be confused, I would play it. So I don't know. Let me know in the comment section down below if I'm missing something, but I don't think there's really anything that does that. Additionally, Marnie's Grimmsnarl is pretty strong into most Dragapult variants, and I think it does still have a fighting chance against PultZard as well, but especially straight PultDusk, right? You're really able to spread a lot of damage with the Frostlass onto the Dracloaks, then take some really powerful multi KOs, and they can't really do much to your Grimmsnarls, right? They only have Phantom Dive as an attacking option, which is going to result in a bunch of damage all over your board on your Monkey Dories, which you can just send back onto them for some free KOs. As far as weaknesses go for this deck, I do find it to be relatively weak into those aggro decks. Joltik being the chief among them, but even Raging Bolt, which I didn't put on here, not necessarily a bad matchup, but, Raging Bolt, they take a prize on turn 1 with Raging Bolt, like the baby one. They take another prize, and it can quickly snowball if you don't have a strong start. And then, of course, the other decks that utilize Grass Pokemon, Toedscruel EX, just an awful matchup, and Eevee Box as well with that Leafeon EX, going to be pretty strong into this Grimmsnarl deck. As far as the list goes, we've got Azul's list from NAIC, which I really liked. I think I made one change to his list, which was cutting something for a rescue board. He's not playing the Badoo, which I actually quite like. I think Badoo is a huge liability in this format. I've talked about it in PultZard, but also in this Grimmsnarl deck. But because he wasn't playing Badoo, he figured he didn't need the rescue board, which I disagree with. I think you still need that because of Monkey Dory. You don't want to get your Grimmsnarls confused. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but that's what I think. I think I cut the 9th Dark Energy. I think that's what he had in there, which kind of serves a similar purpose in retreating, but otherwise the list pretty standard. The Iron Bundle, probably another card I should call out. I think that card's very strong in a couple specific situations, right? The Grimmsnarl Mirror. You don't want to be punching into your opponent's Grimmsnarl, so Iron Bundle, really strong there. Additionally, it's really strong against Joltik Box, right? When they use Jolting Charge, you really don't want to just be attacking into the Joltik, right? You want to be using Iron Bundle, force up a 2-prizer, and then you can take out the Joltik with the Snipe and go from there. Additionally, I also find the Iron Bundle to be pretty useful against PultZard in some specific situations where they have an EX Pokemon in the active with damage on it, and you sometimes actually don't want to kill it because then you would die to the Charizard, and so the bundle lets you bring up like a 1-prizer, kill that, which can sometimes set you up quite nicely. I really do just generally like this Iron Bundle card. Coming in at number 4 here, we have PultDusk. As far as the deck's strengths goes, I'm really going to be talking about this deck kind of in terms of Pult, like why is this deck different than PultZard? I think that kind of makes the most sense. So obviously it's strong into PultZard, and it's also strong into Charizard decks in general. We saw Gabriel Fernandez win NAIC in the seniors division with a pretty cool Charizard build, Picnic Basket, Monkey Dory, Dark Energy Luminous. I thought that was a pretty cool package to kind of have a chance against these Pult decks and Grimmsnarl and whatnot, but I do think this deck is still rather strong into Charizard. And I also think that people really like Charizard, right? Back when it was, Pidgeysard, like Arven for Forest Sealstone, whatever format that was, that deck, people loved that deck. So I think definitely people will be trying to bring Charizard to the local League Cups. It's also decently strong into Gardevoir. So I think that's a big plus for PultDusk. I also put Gardevoir in the strengths column, not really because I think this deck is necessarily good into Gardevoir, but because I think it's better than PultZard into Gardevoir, while still being a Dragapult deck, which gives you access to Dracloak, which is probably the best part of the deck. And for weaknesses, I put Grimmsnarl. I think this deck is significantly worse into Grimmsnarl, kind of the biggest reason why I like PultZard over it. Additionally, you could slot in all of the aggro decks into weaknesses, because I think that PultZard is better into Raging Bolt, Joltik Box. I think those are really the aggro decks. So kind of overall, this PultDusk deck, you get a bit better into Gardevoir and a bit worse into just about everything in the format, but Gardevoir is a big deal, so maybe that is worth it, and it's going to give it the number 4 spot on the list. As far as the list goes, I'm just rocking John Eng's list from Portland. A little bit of an old list, but I actually quite like it. Nowadays, these guys have all kind of migrated over to a Neo Upper build. We saw Benny Billinger, I think, was in the top 32 or 64 at NAIC. Drew Hedrick was playing this deck, John Eng, maybe a Bon as well. That kind of group of guys all playing Neo Upper Energy, Jamming Tower, which I just don't really like. I find part of the reason why Badoo is so strong is the Unfair Stamp comboed with it, right? If you don't have the Unfair Stamp, your opponent is very incentivized to just kill your Badoo for a free prize, right? Something like a Dracloak attack, even a Dreepy attack, or a slap from Screamtail, or More Grimm's attack. I mean, that one's kind of worse. Maybe just a Monkey Dory ping onto the Badoo, with some Frost Asses from Grimmsnarl. So I really do like the unfair stamp, kind of discourage your opponent from killing your Badoo, because the whole point is that the Badoo is supposed to be buying you time to set up your Pults and your Dusknors, and then go in with some kind of devastating combo play. So this is the build of the deck that I would be playing if I might bring it to my local League Cups if too many people are playing Gardevoir. Yeah, this is the build that I would go with. Coming in at number 5, we have Raging Bolt. I've mentioned it a few times already. Very strong deck, although I don't think it is particularly strong on paper. None of its really top tier matchups are amazing. It is just a very consistent, aggressive deck that punishes kind of average to slightly low roll draws, right? If you don't have, like in the case of Dragapult and Guardy, if you don't have turn 1 TM Evo or turn 2 Candy something, right, and Raging Bolt's able to get up 2 prizes, the game does get pretty scary, right? And that's where this deck really thrives. Also, it has some strength, right? The Joltik matchup, very, very strong. The Gholdengo matchup, also very strong. And as far as the weaknesses go, I do think Gardevoir, when it sets up, does kind of destroy Raging Bolt. But again, Raging Bolt, very consistent. Gardevoir, not very consistent. So especially you're going to your League Cups, playing some best of 1 games, you can definitely steal some games off of Gardevoir with this deck. As far as the list goes, I'm just taking the guidance of Michael Meal from NAIC, 126th place. More specifically, this is a group of guys from Canada. We got Christian Labella and Julian Gortberry. And I'm sure there's also a couple other guys kind of in on this list. I'm sorry to the people that I'm forgetting here, but I mean, the list is really good. They've obviously put a lot of time into it. I like that they're playing Professor Turo in the Raging Bolt deck. I think that gives them a lot of control, especially against Gardevoir. I find this is really strong if they're trying to set up for some kind of multi-prize play where they like kill a lot of things at once. Of course, it also acts as an out to Maractus, which we saw in Tord Reklev's Dragapult deck at NAIC. And otherwise, the list is pretty standard. The Jamming Tower, the Bravery Charm is another card, kind of with that Turo, preventing those multi-prize KOs, I do think is really strong. If I were to make any changes to this list, I think I would take out the Iron Leaves potentially, just for like a 6th grass energy. And then one other thing I have been seeing as far as Raging Bolt goes, and a lot of my friends have really been enjoying, is the Japanese City League Championship winning list. I think it could definitely be optimized a little bit, but the idea with that list, it doesn't even play Knockdowls. It actually opts to call second and attack on turn 1. And then it plays a Chien-Pao with the idea that you can put down area 0, fill your bench, put down the Chien-Pao, discard the stadium, and then discard some of your Pokemon, right? So instead of the Turo and the Bravery Charm to deny those knockouts, they use the Chien-Pao and area 0 to extend the bench, and then limit it again, discarding all the Pokemon, probably including the Chien-Pao. And I thought that was pretty cool. I haven't put a lot of time into that, but I could definitely see that being good. A Raging Bolt deck that actually calls second and attacks on turn 1, because I know for a fact, as a PultZard player, as someone who's played some Gardevoir as well, those decks would really struggle with a Raging Bolt deck that can just attack on turn 1 going second and then continue attacking. Coming in at number 6 here, we've got Joltik Box. Now, for the strengths of this deck, I think the Gardevoir matchup is actually pretty solid. I think as far as aggro decks go, Joltik Box is better than Raging Bolt at just running them off the board, right? A lot of the lists, Isaiah Bradner's list and Henry Chow's list, whoever's the mastermind, I don't know, maybe they're both the mastermind, but they don't play Drifloon. So if people are going to be copying that list for the local League Cups, that's a huge plus for this. You go in with your Iron Hands Bravery Charm on turn 2 or 3, right? You're not going to get blown up by Drifloon, and you can just keep taking 2 prize KOs onto their bench Pokemon. Additionally, the Grimmsnarl matchup is very good, which is kind of one of the premier ways to counter Gardevoir, in my opinion. So that really gives 2 massive strengths for Joltik Box. However, it does have a few glaring weaknesses, chief among them being the Raging Bolt matchup being very bad. People love playing Raging Bolt, and so having a bad matchup against one of the most popular decks, I think the most popular deck at NAIC, potentially, is not a good thing. Also, some of your other matchups aren't great. Like PultZard, if they set up, is not great. And I think some of the other decks on this list... You know what, now that I'm saying it, I feel like this deck doesn't have that many glaring weaknesses other than that Raging Bolt matchup. So if none of your locals are playing Raging Bolt, this is a great deck to dominate your local League Cups. As far as the list goes, this is the list that I've been playing. I haven't put too much time into this. I was testing it a decent amount leading up to NAIC. Since then, haven't really touched the deck, but I had the Genesect in there. I think that card is really strong at blocking Unfair Stamp. Maybe nowadays you could move away from the Genesect. If all these Pult players are just going to be playing Neo Upper Energy, then I guess you don't really need the Genesect. It is also good to block Gardevoir's Secret Box. And then otherwise, the list is just super standard. Really prioritizing consistency. I'm not playing, I think Gravity Mountain is the biggest thing I'm not playing. Iono, right? Those one of cards in a deck like this where you're not drawing a lot of cards, I think just don't get very much value. And so this is the list I've been rocking for Joltik Box. At number 7, we have Gholdengo. Now, right now this deck is a little low on the list, but I think with the addition of the new black and white set, the Genesect EX and the Air Balloon, I think this deck is going to shoot up quite significantly. Probably going to be the biggest change in the meta. But for now, we're going to have it at number 7 with a couple strengths, Dragapult being number 1. I think one of the reasons Gholdengo was kind of poor in the past was straight Dragapult playing the Genesect, right? Blocking the Energy Search Pro. They would quite often just play an Unfair Stamp, put down the Genesect, and your deck would not function. You could not KO Dragapults, and that was a really big deal. Nowadays, people are moving over to Duskpult and PultZard, which don't have that kind of stamp Genesect option. And so I think those matchups are actually pretty favorable for the Gholdengo deck. I mean, unless PultZard plays Chi-Yu, but I just don't really think people are doing that. So it's going to be pretty good into Dragapult. It's also pretty solid into Gardevoir, especially if they're not going to be playing Drifloon. Then maybe you can even get away without playing the Jamming Tower. Again, it's like this whole thing against Guardy where if you know exactly what the Guardy list you're playing against is, then you could change your list, but you just don't know. So you probably got to be playing that Jamming Tower still in case they are playing the Drifloon. And then, yes, I put the PultZard in there as well. As far as weaknesses, Raging Bolt, again, pretty glaring weakness. Joltik Box and Gholdengo, both kind of gate kept by the Raging Bolt. They just can't deal with a combination of the one prize Pokemon, right? Joltik Box struggles with the Slitherwing, Gholdengo struggles with the Baby Bolt, and then also just not really able to prize trade effectively at the start of the game. Quite often, if you put down your Gholdengo, you take the first prize, Raging Bolt's just going to blow you up and take 2 prizes every turn. You can't win. And if you don't put down a Gholdengo, well, they're just going to attack with their one prize Pokemon, and then you still can't take the first 2. And so the Raging Bolt matchup is pretty doomed for this Gholdengo deck. As far as the list goes, this is what I was testing for NAIC. The one big call out here, I would say, is the Picnic Basket, which I think is pretty solid against Grimmsnarl. One other thing I did see was that Grant Shen made top 64 with the Team Rocket's Venture Bomb, which seemed pretty good, right? The idea being you Venture Bomb, and then that lets you knock out Pikachu EX, right? So if you're playing into a meta where you think there's going to be a lot of Joltik Box, a lot of Pikachu EX, maybe it's Terra Box as well, the Venture Bomb could be a good call out. I think that really turns those matchups on their head. Whereas before, you can't really deal with Pikachu EX. Now you have the ability to do so. So if you were anticipating more of those Pikachu decks than Grimmsnarl, you could take out the Picnic Basket. But I also do think the Picnic Basket finds uses elsewhere against Gardevoir, against Dragapult. Lots of spreading with lots of Monkey Dories going on right now. So I do think that's a good card. Otherwise, the list is pretty standard. 4 Cypher Maniacs, just really strong. 2 Pokegears. I think Pokegear is really good in this deck for the turn 1 Arven, for the Cypher in the mid game, for Boss's Orders in the late game, and even the Turo in the specific cases you need it. Now, in the next format, when the Air Balloons and the Genesect come out, I expect this deck to change a lot. I think Dragapult will probably come out of the deck. Maybe we'll get some other draw support Pokemon in there, like a Revavroom could be cool. Not really sure, but for now, this is the build that I've been rocking with. Coming in at number 8, we have Zoroark, and really the reason this deck is on the list is that it has a very strong Gardevoir matchup. And, well, maybe I shouldn't say very strong. Seems like a very strong Gardevoir matchup nowadays means you're beating them like 60% of the time, I would say. I don't know. If you talk to Liam Halliburton, he's pretty confident on this one. I'm a little less convinced. The Dragapult matchup for the Zoroark deck, also relatively solid. The powerful Rage from Reshiram, pretty solid into most of the Dragapult archetypes. I mean, again, I think that PultZard kind of gets a little bit of counterplay to that. They can actually one-shot the Zoroark EX. Same thing with PultDusk, actually, which is the other premier Pult archetype. Right? They just blow up Dusknoirs, and so maybe the powerful Rage isn't actually that good. The Darmanitan, however, is definitely good, as I have not seen very many Dragapult builds playing Shaman, so that definitely gives this deck a huge boost into Dragapult, and those are 2 of the top decks. Additionally, the other top deck, Grimmsnarl, I think the matchup is pretty solid. Probably its worst matchup among the big three decks of the format. I think that sometimes the Frostlasses just build up a lot, and then you get TM'd Evolutioned, and that is kind of a disaster. But you do have the Double Monkey nowadays, which kind of helps you offset that damage buildup. Powerful Rage, pretty strong into Grimmsnarls if they're going to be hitting into you for 180. So that matchup seems pretty decent. As far as the weaknesses go, kind of some silly decks in the weaknesses category. I mean, Joltik Box, very real deck, right? They have the Galvantula, that's going to hit you for weakness. They have the Iron Leaves, that's going to hit you for weakness. They have Iron Hands, which you also can't really one-shot. And so really just a lot of things going against you against Joltik Box. And then Toedscruel, kind of similar story. I think that matchup's actually better than Joltik Box, which is kind of funny considering how heavy of a grass deck Toedscruel is. But that's going to be a pretty bad matchup as well. Of course, they're just able to one-shot you. You can't one-shot them. You can maybe get the Darmanitan involved. But as we get into the list, it is significantly less Darmanitan involved than it has been in the past. Just the 1/1 line and the 1 reversal energy. So the deck is significantly weaker against those aggro decks, right? Something like a Terra Box or the Toedscruel or also Raging Bolt, I think, is another matchup you get a lot worse with because you want to be using those one prize attackers to offset that prize trade, but you can only use the Darmanitan once, so it's a little awkward for sure. But the reason we're doing this, of course, is Shaman. We can't be super dependent on the Darmanitan nowadays because of Shaman. We're going to be more reliant on Reshiram and Monkey Dory, more of kind of a tanky build, right? With the rigid bands, we go 310 HP, then we use the monkeys to heal off the damage, or if they deal enough, maybe we're using the powerful Rage to take some big one-hit KOs. You'll notice this build is very anti-Badoo, which I find to be maybe a little bit unnecessary, right? There's no Nest Balls in the deck. That's a card that I found I would like. There's no search actually for Darmanitan in the deck at all, other than the Cypher Maniac. So this deck really is not built to go for aggressive Darmanitan attacks. It's mostly there as an option in the mid game, a one prize attacker to use, likely going to have to be comboed with a Cypher Maniac if you want to get that Darmanitan attack off. At number 9, we have Charizard. As I'm going through this tier list, I actually feel like maybe I dogged Charizard a little bit. This deck is pretty strong. Of course, I'm going to show the list in a sec, but it is just going to be Gabriel Fernandez's NAIC champion list, right? Pretty strong into Gholdengo with the Chiyu. Pretty strong into Grimmsnarl, actually, I think, with the combination of Picnic Basket and Monkey Dory. If the spread gets out of hand, if double Frostlass comes onto the board, I think you can definitely face some issues. But generally, I think that matchup's going to be pretty solid. I think the Gardevoir matchup is pretty solid as well. I didn't put it in the strengths or weaknesses column kind of because I think it's actually fairly close. Again, with the Mind Bend, it does get very annoying. Onto your Charizard, you're going to have to do some retreating or some coin flipping. I think actually the coin flipping part of Confusion is overlooked. People tend to retreat more than they should, including myself, actually. Sometimes you just got to flip the coin, even though it sucks, and just put the game down to that, which is kind of silly, but it is what it is. For weaknesses, I got Dragapult on here. Specifically, I think PultDusk is a much worse matchup. Of course, they're able to just blow up Dusknors, kill Charizards, kill Pidgeots. We saw Gabriel Fernandez in the finals was really picking apart his opponent's Dusknors, and that was able to bring him to victory. But I think if they're able to get out a decent amount of the Dusknors, get some crucial KOs, especially onto the Pidgeot early on, the deck also somewhat weak to Badoo. It is kind of built to exist through Badoo, but a little weak into the Badoo, so especially PultDusk, really abusing that Badoo can slow you down quite a lot. Also, I think this deck is a little weak into some of the aggro decks of the format. Raging Bolt, Joltik Box, I think they're actually able to run you off the board quite frequently. They use the Joltik power-up hands, come in, boom, and then they're going 2/2/2 prize map on you, and there's not a whole lot you can do other than take some knockouts, play some Ionos, and hope it works out. Here's a list if you guys are unfamiliar. We see there are 2 copies of Brock and 2 copies of TM Evolution. That's kind of your anti-Badoo package. So you can get out your Pidgeot under Badoo. And then once you got Pidgeot, you're laughing, right? You search out whatever you want. You get your evolutions going, you get your Charizard, and you're off to the races. One other big call out I'll make from this deck is the Maximum Belt. I think that is almost a necessity in the deck when you're not playing Dusknor. You need to be able to take big KOs if your opponent just decides to kind of sit there, right? If you didn't play the Max Belt, something like Joltik Box could even use Jolting Charge twice, right? Power up 2 Iron Hands and the Galvantula and then go in for the first 2 prizes, which would be a disaster. So you've got the Maximum Belt in order to actually be able to apply some pressure. Additionally, this lets you kill Pokemon like Dragapult EX and Grimmsnarl EX when your opponent's on 3 prizes, which is also a big deal because being walled out of killing those Pokemon can definitely lose you some games. And the best part about it is if your opponent's on 3, you got the maximum belt, and then you get knocked out, well, now your maximum belt's gone, but you actually just do enough damage to continue taking those one shots. So pretty well built deck, and definitely something I'm considering taking to my local League Cups this coming weekend. And coming in at number 10, I wasn't entirely sure what to put here, so I decided to give Ray Chen a shout out here for their Toedscruel deck, as I think it actually does have a decent amount of merit to it. I think it's pretty strong into Dragapult. I mean, we saw them beat Tord on stream at NAIC. I think they ended up losing to Tord in the final. But they did take out Tord, which I think is definitely something that is not going to be ignored. Of course, Tord's a great player. So I think this deck is actually very strong into Dragapult when it gets set up, right? The Toedscruel's ability blocking Phantom Dive from killing the Toadschools. If you have like your max bench with the area 0 and all the energies, you are able to take out Dragapults. And so I think that does make this deck pretty solid. It's also very quick, right? It attacks on the second turn of the game. So if your opponent is taking too long to get going, they're trying to use Badoo or something, you're going to be able to get through quite reliably. And then, of course, the Grimmsnarl matchup is a very positive matchup. You're a grass type. You're going to be taking some big one-shots. You're going to be doing it very quickly. And for weaknesses, we do have Gardevoir. I think this deck just doesn't line up particularly well into Gardevoir. They're able to get the Monkey Dories going, take some one-shots onto your Toedscruels. They've got multiple artisans in the secret box to get rid of your Area 0 underdepths and maybe prevent some one-shots onto the Gardevoir. Right, Screamtail can take out some of your support Pokemon like the Fezandipiti and whatnot. And so I think that is why Toedscruel is fallen all the way down to number 10 on this list, but it's still sneaking in there. Also, I think this deck is decent into the aggro decks, decent into Raging Bolt. I mean, I don't think it's great into Raging Bolt, to be honest, but it's okay into Raging Bolt. It's okay into Joltik Box, and so it'll make it on here at number 10. Definitely a great deck to try out if you want to have some fun, play something a little off meta. I think at this point, people do know what this deck does, but I definitely don't think they're very well practiced against it, as even I am not particularly well practiced against this Toedscruel deck. Here's the list. I really didn't feel qualified to change it in any way. The one thing that I think when I look at this deck is why like the Badoo feels a little bit out of place. Additionally, I just generally am pretty low on Badoo right now. Seems like everybody's using Monkey Dories, and so the Badoo gets a lot less value. But this is the list, and that's going to wrap up our top 10 list. Let me know in the comment section down below, which deck did I put too high or too low on this tier list? Which one completely missed the list and it should have been on here? And other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.